What are the best jobs out there, and how much could you make if you're considering a change in career? Daniel Zhao is senior economist at Glassdoor, which just released its annual 50 Best Jobs in America list. Daniel, it's always good to see you. Thank you for speaking with us. Before we get to the number one job, we want to build up some suspense here. It's notable that almost half of the 50 best jobs that you have listed are in technology, which really makes me wonder about accessibility. Are these tech jobs only accessible to computer science and engineer graduates, or could an English major figure it out on the job?
Well, tech jobs do dominate our list in part because every company today is a tech company. There are increasingly investments from businesses of all walks to actually invest in that technology and data infrastructure to make sure that they're making decisions in the 21st century. There are some jobs that are more geared for workers with a background like a STEM education or those kinds of skills, but there are also jobs that do require a little bit less of that higher education. So, for example, data analyst is a role that generally does require quantitative skills, but not necessarily a PhD in a STEM field, for example.
Okay, that's good to know because otherwise that would rule out a lot of people. The factors you use to determine the top jobs include earnings potential, as well as job satisfaction, and the number of job openings on your site, on Glassdoor. And the top three jobs in your report are all tech-centric. You've got enterprise architect, full stack engineer, and data scientist. Explain what an enterprise architect is. What does that even mean?
An enterprise architect generally designs and manages a company's IT infrastructure. And so that's been particularly important, again, because businesses are increasingly investing in IT, not just tech companies, but every company. And then on top of that, it's been extra important during the pandemic because partial workforces or full workforces are working from home. And on top of that, there's just much more that you need to keep track of in the pandemic where things could be going wrong. And there's just like a lot of disruptions to the business environment today.
So how much of these three top jobs are directly linked or a result of the shift to more digital, more remote work?
Well, I would say that they're dominating the list in part because of the importance of remote and flexible work arrangements. That is something that we've heard is extremely important for employees during the pandemic. And job satisfaction tends to be higher in these tech roles that do offer flexible work arrangements. That being said, we do know that tech jobs have been at the top of the list for some time, in part because demand for these roles is very high. Employers are willing to pay top dollar for top talent, and that's really been reflected in salaries and the number of job openings that we've seen over the years.
And speaking of salaries, the highest paid job in your top 50 list is psychiatrist with a median base salary of $252,000. Of course, being a psychiatrist is not something that anyone can just step into. You need to put an investment in there. You have with time and money with getting that higher degree. Talk a little bit about the pipeline there for this kind of job and for healthcare jobs overall.
hmm Well, we do see several medical professions on our list, and like you say, many of them require a significant amount of training and education to actually get into those roles. But what we're seeing is that for those workers, that does end up paying off with very high salaries. With psychiatrists specifically and psychologists, we are also seeing that mental health care is a common theme because of the pandemic. The demand for mental health care has risen dramatically over the course of the pandemic, and that's probably why we're seeing mental health professions rise on our list because of that increase in demand.
Right. So that would explain the higher pay, maybe not necessarily job satisfaction, since there are so many issues tied to mental health, which can be a challenge. When it comes to job satisfaction, the job with the highest job satisfaction, surprisingly, is corporate recruiter. I was kind of taken aback by this because they are on the front lines of dealing with the labor shortage that we currently face. What can you tell us about the corporate recruiter role?
hmm Well, certainly there are pros and cons to the challenge because, on the one hand, it does mean that life is very difficult for recruiters right now, but it also means that they're in very high demand. Employers recognize that with the great resignation raging, they need to find top talent to help them find top talent. And so employers recognize that not just recruiters, but also HR managers and HR business partners are increasingly important. That's increasing demand. And ultimately, I think the other element of this is that many of these people related roles are more flexible or have the ability to be done remotely or in hybrid working arrangements. That's something that we actually saw even before the pandemic. Many people related roles were some of the first to actually allow remote work. And so that's something that, again, is extra important during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so drum roll, let's get to the top job now, which is enterprise architect. Tell us more specifically about how much you can make in this job and what the career path is once you get it.
hmm Enterprise architects on average make well into the six figures. I believe the number is about 140,000. And the opportunities for this as a career are very significant and in part a reason why it is our top job. Many people who are enterprise architects do end up becoming a chief information officer, for example. So C-suite level job is definitely on that career trajectory.
Right, and we've seen how chief technology officers can become the CEO as well. If you look at Twitter, for instance, one reason why so many businesses are short of staff at the moment is because workers are upgrading their skills and changing career paths as a result. Can you give us a sense of what kinds of technical skills you would suggest for anyone who's interested in tapping into these tech-centric jobs that you have listed?
hmm Yeah, there are some hard skills. So, for example, picking up languages like Python or Java can help workers get into some of these more technical roles. But I think on top of that, there are also some more general technical skills like analytical skills, data analysis, quantitative analysis. These are all really important and not just for technical roles, but also for non technical roles as well. If you think about project managers or product managers, oftentimes those analytical skills can help differentiate you from other people in your field and can help you up level even within your current occupation.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I think that gets left aside a lot of the times when people are so concerned with making sure that they have the technical credentials. Daniel, big picture here, as quickly as the U.S. economy is growing, and we mentioned 6.9% in the fourth quarter, we have this odd labor shortage where there aren't enough people to fill the open positions, but there are still many more people who are unemployed than there were before the pandemic began. To what extent are the 50 best jobs that you have identified going to result in fewer jobs down the road, meaning they use technology to make current jobs obsolete later on?
I think that's a very interesting question. I will say that technology and automation, there's actually not a consensus on how exactly that impacts jobs, because on the one hand, it can result in the automation of certain tasks, but by making workers more productive, it can also help raise their wages. It can also create new opportunities or new spaces for jobs that didn't exist in the past. And on top of that, there are some roles that might get automated, but aren't necessarily ones that are putting people in the best position for long-term career development. And so ultimately, I think it is a mixed picture. We do want to make sure that people's jobs don't get fully automated away, but in many cases, this is about making workers more productive, which can ultimately help them get better wages as a result.
Got it, got it. Do senior economists or television correspondents show up at all in the top 50 list, top 100?
Unfortunately not, but maybe next year.
All right, we can only hope. Daniel, thank you so much. Daniel Zhao is senior economist at Glassdoor talking about the top 50 jobs of 2022.